state calls Kyle Felix. Good morning, sir. If you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to present before this court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So you got it.
I do.
Please be seated. If you will, could you scoot up toward the microphone, state your full name, and spell your last name, please.
My name is Kyle Felix, K-Y-L-E-F-E-L-I-X.
And Mr. Felix, where do you work?
I am currently employed as a firearms examiner for the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory located at Gillum Enclave in Forest Park, Georgia.
And working with the military, what exactly do you do?
Well, I am a firearms examiner or firearms scientist, and our primary duty is what's called microscopic identification. That's where we take bullets and cartridge cases found at crime scenes or autopsies and determine if they were fired from a specific firearm or from the same gun if there is no firearm submitted.
Now, back in March of 2011, where did you work?
In March of 2011, I was employed as a firearms examiner with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab, located in Atlanta, Georgia.
And what were your duties and responsibilities as a firearms examiner with the GBI?
They were the same primary duty as with the U.S. Army Crime Lab. I was a firearms examiner performing microscopic identifications.
And are you required to fire weapons and examine known cartridges or projectiles with unknown cartridges and projectiles?
I am.
Okay. And do you perform comparisons and making or draw conclusions from that?
I do.
Okay. And can you briefly describe your educational background that allows you to do what you do?
I received a Bachelor of Science from the University of Central Florida with a major in forensic science and minors in chemistry and criminal justice. I also completed an internship with the firearms section with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab located in Orlando, Florida. When I was hired by the GBI, I underwent a 2-year training program in the areas of firearms identification. Then from 2007 to 2013, I worked casework as a firearms examiner for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab. And from 2013 to the present day, I have been working casework in the firearms section for the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory. I have attended and completed 6 armorers courses with Smith & Wesson, Glock, Beretta, Colt, Sig Sauer, and Fabrique Nationale, and I've attended 12 manufacturing plant tours. I am also published in the AFTI Journal, or the Association of Firearms and Toolmarks Examiner Journal, which is the scientific journal for our discipline.
And are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, I am a member of AFTI, which is, again, the Association of Firearms and Toolmarks Examiners. It's the professional organization for firearms examiners.
And do you hold any certifications?
I am certified in 3 areas by AFTI. I am certified in firearms examination, toolmark examination, and distance determination.
And how many years have you been a firearms examiner?
I've been a firearms examiner since from 2007 to 2015, so approximately 7 to 8 years.
And have you ever either formally or informally taught others in the field of firearms examination?
I have.
And can you describe that to the jury?
I've taught microscopic comparison of bullets and cartridge cases to several examiners at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab. I've also taught informally several classes in high school and college in firearms examination and expert witness testimony.
And have you ever testified before as an expert?
I have.
How many times?
Approximately 135 times.
And how many different jurisdictions or courts?
Well, I've testified in several counties in the state of Georgia in the state courts, and I've also testified in several military court-martials.
And what was your field of expertise when you testified as an expert?
in firearms and firearms examination.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender Mr. Kyle Felix as an expert in the field of firearms and firearms examination.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I have a few body questions I would like to ask Mr. Felix.
All right.
Mr. Felix, how many cases have you worked total?
I've worked approximately 600 to 700 cases.
Okay. How many times you testified in courts?
135 times approximately.
You said approximately that's total or stuff. You just don't have the specific number today.
I don't have the specific number, but it's around there.
Okay. How many times have you testified for the prosecution?
Every time.
So, none for the defense.
I've testified for the defense, but usually when I testify for the defense, I was also testifying for the prosecution as well.
Okay. Well, you lost me on that. You said you testified for the prosecution every time.
That's correct.
So, are you telling that you a hired gun for the prosecution side?
No, sir.
What would you classify that as then?
The prosecution is the one that subpoenaed me. The defense, when they either cross-examine me or want me to testify for them, they subpoena me as well.
Okay. Well, how can you testify for the prosecution every time? Huh? For the defendant. What I'm trying to say, sir, is you straight pro-prosecution, what it sounds like.
Your Honor, objection.
Okay, I see it. I'm sorry. Are you a pro-prosecution?
No, sir.
Well, will you agree that you have testified more for the prosecution?
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point because the nature of this voir dire is simply qualifications. It's not to conduct a cross-examination.
That's correct.
Have you ever knowingly and willingly perjured yourself on the stand before?
Your Honor, objection. That is argumentative and
Sustained.
inappropriate.
This is all about qualifications.
Is this part of the qualification, Judge? I mean, I think
I
I have.
sustain that objection.
So I can't get into that. Well, if you tell me I can't, I can.
Not at this point.
Okay, well,
This is not a cross-examination. This is on the voir dire and on the issue of whether me qualify as an expert.
okay. No further questions?
All right. Any objection?
I guess not. No.
All right. The witness will be allowed to testify as an expert in the area of firearms examination, tool marking examination.
Thank you. Mr. Felix, where exactly is the GBI located as far as the firearms section?
The firearms section is located in the GBI crime lab, or the state lab, which is located in Atlanta, Georgia, more specifically in DeKalb.
And do you know whether when you were working there and performed the test we're about to speak of, was that crime lab accredited?
It was.
And can you tell the jury what is meant by an accredited laboratory?
When a laboratory is accredited, it means that the laboratory not only has policies and procedures that are accepted by the scientific community, as well as a quality system that maintains and oversees those procedures, but that the GBI actively follows those regulations and those procedures, and they're checked up on by the accrediting body.
And to your knowledge, had the crime lab followed those policies and procedures and protocols?
They were. At the time, they were ASCLD Lab International accredited, which is following the ISO 1725 standard.
Now, before I ask you specific questions about evidence that you examined in this case, I would like to ask you just some basic questions about firearms in general.
Of course.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as States Exhibits 1136 through 1143.
Those already in?
No, sir. No, no. Now, Mr. Felix, if you don't mind, can you look at States Exhibits 1136 through 1143? Would these slides assist you in explaining to the jury some basic principles of firearms and firearms examination?
Okay. May I show them to the jury, or?
No,
Oh.
I just need to answer my questions first, and then we'll present this to the jury. So the question is, would these slides assist you in explaining to the jury basic information, basic principles involving firearms and firearms examination?
They will.
Okay. At this time, Your Honor, we would like to tender States Exhibits 1136 through 1143 for demonstrative purposes.
Objection.
No, sir, Your Honor.
They're admitted for demonstrative purposes.
Thank you. Mr. Felix, the first question I'm going to ask you regarding States Exhibit 1136, can you describe the different types of handguns or firearms that you see on a daily basis?
Well, with this demonstration, there are two photos, and the first photo that you see is a pistol or a semi-automatic handgun, and the one next to that is a revolver.
And what is sort of distinguishes a revolver from a semi-automatic pistol?
Well, with the pistol, you have a removable magazine, and the cartridges or the live ammunition is loaded into this magazine and inserted into the grip of the firearm. And on the top of the pistol is a movable slide. So when you move the slide back and release it, the top cartridge from the magazine is stripped from the magazine, inserted into the chamber, allowing the gun to be fired. Now, when the gun is fired, due to the forces of recoil, that slide will move back, extracting and ejecting that cartridge case so that a new cartridge from the magazine can be moved into the chamber when the slide is pushed forward again. With the revolver, instead of a magazine, you have a built-in cylinder with multiple chambers built into that cylinder. Each one of those chambers will hold one cartridge, and one of those cartridges will be in line with the barrel. So when you pull the trigger, you fire the gun. When you want to fire the gun again, that cylinder will rotate, aligning a new chamber and a new cartridge with the barrel. Now, unlike a pistol, the cartridge cases in a revolver remain in the cylinder until they're removed manually by the operator.
Thank you. Now, with regard to States Exhibit 1137, can you sort of describe some of the basic components of each type of firearm?
Well, what you see on the right is a pistol, and you have the magazine, which is inserted into the grip of the firearm. You have that movable slide, what they have labeled as the, oh, thank you. You have that movable slide, which is what they have labeled as the action. So when the slide is pushed forward, you have a cartridge from the magazine inserted into the chamber, which is connected to the barrel, and the gun's ready to fire. So when you fire the gun, the bullet travels down the barrel. At the same time, the slide will move back, extracting and ejecting the cartridge case, and then when the slide moves forward again, a new cartridge is inserted into the chamber. With a revolver, you have the cylinder, which has the multiple chambers, and one of those chambers will be in line with the muzzle, or the barrel. When you pull the trigger, the gun will fire, and then when you pull the trigger again, that cylinder will rotate and rotate a new chamber and a new cartridge in line with the barrel. In the barrel, for the pistol and the revolver, you have what's called rifling. And rifling are helical grooves that are manufactured into the barrel, and their purpose is to impart spin onto the bullet when the gun is fired. Kind of like when you throw a football, you put spin on the football to make it more accurate. Same principle with the bullet.
Okay. And let me just ask you a couple questions regarding the semi-automatic pistol. You had mentioned earlier that the slide will actually move due to the gases and a spent casing is ejected. So I want to ask a question about the spent casing. When the spent casing is ejected, are there unique marks placed upon this casing, and is that important information for you?
Yes, when the firearm is fired, the bullet will travel down the barrel, but also the cartridge case will slam against the breech face of the firearm. And when that cartridge case hits that breech face, all of the unique individual characteristics on that breech face will impart onto that cartridge case. So that's how we're able to examine cartridge cases and identify them back to firearms.
And in addition to the marks from the breech face, does the hammer hit in specific areas when it hits the shell casing?
Yes, the cartridge is ignited by when the firing pin strikes the primer, and the primer would then detonate. So that firing pin is also a manufactured piece of the firearm, so it's going to have its own unique characteristics. And when that firing pin strikes that primer, all those imperfections are then imparted onto the primer of the cartridge case.
Thank you. Now, with respect to State's Exhibit 1138, can you describe, if you will, different types of ammunition and what makes the different types of ammunition unique?
Of course. What you're seeing here are different types of unfired cartridges or unfired ammunition. And each one of them looks different because each one of them is actually a different caliber. A caliber is a designation given to a specific cartridge. So when you see a gun with a specific caliber printed on it, you know that that gun can safely fire cartridges that are designated that caliber. So if a gun is a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson, it could safely fire a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson cartridge.
Now, with respect to State's Exhibit 1139, could you briefly discuss the different components of a bullet and how the bullet operates?
Well, with unfired ammunition or unfired cartridge, there's several components. You have the bullet, which is the projectile that travels down the barrel when the gun is fired. And then you have the cartridge case, and the cartridge case is what holds everything together. In the cartridge case is the gunpowder or the propellant, and that's what ignites and combusts in order to produce the gases that push the bullet down the barrel. And on the bottom of the cartridge is the primer. Now the primer is what the firing pin will strike and what will detonate, and that detonation will then ignite the gunpowder.
And with regard to State's Exhibit 1140, can you kind of describe what happens at that moment that a firing pin strikes that primer?
When the trigger is pulled, the firing pin will strike the primer, and that firing pin striking the primer will cause the primer mixture inside to detonate. And that detonation will spill into the gunpowder and will ignite the gunpowder. When the gunpowder ignites, it actually combusts. And when it combusts, it produces gases inside that cartridge case chamber. Well, that pressure is going to build up. And when it builds up, it has nowhere to go except pushing that bullet down the barrel. So when the gunpowder ignites, it pushes this bullet out of the cartridge case and into the barrel of the firearm.
Thank you. Now, can you briefly describe, using State's Exhibit 1141, what happens when the bullet enters the barrel of the handgun?
When the bullet enters the barrel of the handgun, it engages the rifling, which is those helical grooves. And this is actually where it's very important for firearms examiners, because the individual characteristics found on the bullets are from the rifling of the barrel. Because when every firearm is manufactured, that rifling is machined onto the gun, and that machining process creates random imperfections of what we call individual characteristics. Now, no two guns are going to have the same individual characteristics from the rifling, and the manufacturer doesn't intend for it to happen. They can't stop it, they can't prevent it, they can't manipulate it. So no two guns are going to have those same imperfections. So when that bullet travels down that barrel and engages that rifling, those individual characteristics from the rifling are then imparted onto the bullet and give it sort of a unique fingerprint or a barcode for that specific gun.
And looking at State's Exhibit 1142, if you're looking straight down the barrel, can you describe what we're looking at here?
What you're looking at down the barrel is the rifling, which is curving it can curve in either a clockwise or a counterclockwise direction. And again, the purpose of the rifling is to impart spin on the bullet.
And with respect to State's Exhibit 1143, can you sort of explain what is it that you do with regard to bullet or casing comparisons?
When the bullet is fired from the cartridge, when the bullet is fired from the firearm, when it travels down the rifle into the barrel, those individual characteristics are imparted onto the bullet. That's what those, what we call striations or scratches are. Those are individual characteristics or the unique imperfections. So what we can do is if the firearm is submitted, we'll test fire the firearm and collect pristine test samples, which will then compare to evidence bullets using what's called a comparison microscope, which is the outline that you see here. A comparison microscope is essentially two microscopes compared with an optical bridge, and it allows you to view two samples at the same time under similar conditions. So same magnification, same lighting. So this image that you see up here, that's actually what you would see in comparison microscope. This dividing line actually is separating two images, one image here from this microscope and one image here from this microscope. And what we're looking at are two things that we're looking at. One is class characteristics, one is individual characteristics. The individual characteristics, again, are the unique characteristics that are unique to every single gun. We use those to match a specific type of, a specific firearm. But class characteristics are characteristics that are actually planned by the manufacturer, and their purpose for us is to lower the number of possible weapons from every gun in the world to a much more specific list. A good analogy would be if you're in a parking lot looking for a red Ford F-150, the red paint, the Ford emblem, design of the truck, those are class characteristics that you know to look for that red truck instead of, say, a black Honda Civic. Now, if there's scratches on the bumper, your license plate number, fuzzy dice on the mirror, those are all individual characteristics to allow you to find that specific truck in that parking lot.
So following up on what you just stated, are you able to, say, look at a casing or a bullet without a gun and determine what sort of handgun fired those items?
Yes, using class characteristics we can.
Okay. And when you're doing comparisons with, say, a projectile or a casing that's found at some crime scene, do you actually test fire a gun if you're submitted a gun?
Yes, we test fire any gun that's submitted.
And do you explain that process, how you retain the bullet during your test firing procedure and how you retain the casing?
When we test fire the gun, we test fire the gun into what's called a water recovery tank. Essentially, it's a big metal box that's filled with water, and the purpose of it is the water will slow down and stop the bullets, but more importantly, it'll stop the bullet without damaging it. That way, we get those pristine test samples, which we can then compare to any evidence bullets or evidence cartridge cases that were submitted as well.
All right, thank you. And lights, please. Thank you. Now, in this particular case, while you're working at the GBI crime lab, did you receive any evidence to examine regarding the murder of Officer Elmer Buddy Christian, the shooting of Officer Tony Allen?
I did.
All right. And can you describe the items that you received?
I received a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber pistol, 4 .40 caliber metal jacketed bullets, 4 .40 caliber cartridge cases, magazine, and 8 live rounds of 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridges.
Now, may I show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 913? Now, what I'm showing you, Mr. Kyle, is State's Exhibit 913, a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun that's already been tendered into evidence, recovered at 102 Creekstone in a duplex on a table. I'll ask, first of all, do you recognize that item?
do recognize State's Exhibit 913. It is a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber pistol, serial number RAV 9043. My initials are on the firearm. My seals and initials are on the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number. And the firearm is safe. There is no ammunition or cartridges or live rounds in the firearm at all.
Okay. And what accompanied the firearm?
Accompanying the firearm is a magazine, a package containing live rounds of ammunition, and my test fires.
Now, with respect to the live rounds, do you recall how many live rounds initially came with the weapon?
Initially, there were 8 cartridges submitted with the firearm.
And did you use any of those live rounds to perform any testing in this case?
Yes, I used 3 of the cartridges for my test fires, so there's now a total of 5 cartridges in the package.
And why is it you used the ammunition that came with the weapon?
Because the ammunition that was submitted is unique ammunition. It was actually manufactured in Yugoslavia, and our lab didn't have any Yugoslavian ammunition for reference, so I used the evidence cartridges in order to eliminate any type of variables that could have, for the ammunition when I did my test fires.
And when you did the test fires, did you retain those items that you used for the test fires?
I did.
Okay. And are those in the packages you just described?
They are.
Now, Your Honor, at this point, I'd like to ask the witness to step down and stand, and I'll ask him some questions about this firearm. Mr.
Thank you.
Felix, if you would, could you stand near this microphone for demonstration purposes? Now, before we begin, can you let everybody know that the weapon is safe and there is no ammunition?
Yes, the weapon is safe. It is completely empty. There's no cartridge in the chamber, and there are no cartridges anywhere on my person. So the firearm is completely safe. It will not fire.
Let me ask you to sort of stand catty-cornered this way so the defendant can see the demonstration as well.
Of course.
Is that what you were asking about?
Yes, sir.
May we proceed?
Okay.
Yes.
Now, as part of your process as a firearm examiner, do you physically look at the weapon, make sure it's in proper working condition, and use the weapon as well?
Yes, when the firearm is submitted, we do a function check on the firearm to make sure, number one, that everything's working properly, that the firearm is functioning properly, the safeties are functioning properly, and also to make sure that the firearm is safe to fire so that when I test fire the gun, nothing will happen.
All right. And can you go through that process and start with the safety mechanisms that are on this weapon?
Of course. With the Smith & Wesson pistol, there are 2 safeties. The first is an external trigger safety. The trigger is actually hinged. So if anything other than a finger is pulling that trigger won't pull back. You have to actually engage that bottom half of the trigger so that way you can pull it. The next safety is internal safety, which is called a firing pin safety or a firing pin block. What it does is it physically blocks the firing pin so that it can't protrude from the breech face and strike any primers unless it is disengaged. And the way you can disengage that firing pin safety is to pull the trigger. Pulling the trigger will disengage that firing pin safety.
And if you will, can you insert the magazine into the weapon and demonstrate to the jury how this weapon operates?
Well, with this pistol, there's a removable magazine, and the magazine is what stores the live cartridges or the live ammunition. So when you have the cartridges ready, you insert it into the grip of the firearm, and then close the slide, and the gun is ready to fire. The top cartridge from the magazine was stripped into the chamber of the firearm, so that way the gun is ready to be used. And to fire the gun, all you do is pull the trigger.
Excuse me, I need you to get diagonal again. Thank you.
My apologies. You pull the trigger, and the gun will fire. When the gun fires, the slide, due to the forces of recoil, will move back. And as it moves back, it will extract and eject the cartridge case, in this particular instance to the right and to the rear of the operator. And then the slide will then move forward again, stripping a new cartridge from the magazine into the chamber, so that way the gun will fire again. This is a semi-automatic pistol, so you can only fire one cartridge per pull the trigger. So if you want to fire it again, you have to release the trigger and then pull the trigger again.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about the trigger pull. Can you describe to the jury what we mean by trigger pull and explain if you tested that for this particular weapon?
The trigger pull is the amount of force that's required to pull the trigger and cause the firearm to fire. With this particular firearm, I did test the trigger pull, and the trigger pull was between 10 to 11 pounds of pressure. So when you pull the trigger, it requires at least 10 to 11 pounds to pull that trigger.
Now, when you initially fire the weapon, do you have to load the weapon, like pull the slide back and engage?
Yes, when you have the pistol, if you just load the magazine, insert the magazine, and pull the trigger, nothing's going to happen. Because what you have to do is you have to get a cartridge into that chamber. There's two ways you can do it. You can either have the slide open and insert a cartridge manually into the chamber, close it without the magazine, insert the magazine, then pull the trigger. Or you can load the magazine, insert it, rack the slide, that will get a cartridge from the magazine into the chamber, then pull the trigger. If you just load the magazine and insert it into the firearm, nothing's going to happen because there's no cartridge in the chamber.
All right. And one more question about the trigger pull. You indicated it's over 10 pounds of pressure.
Correct.
Can you give us some sort of idea what that is and what that means?
Basically, it means it's not a hair trigger, which means if I just touch this trigger, nothing's going to happen. If I load the firearm and I just hold the gun like this on the trigger, nothing's going to happen. Touching it's going to do nothing. You have to actually pull the trigger.
All right, thank you. May the witness return. Now, going back to the firearm you received, was it packaged similarly as it is today?
Yes, the firearm was operating as designed.
Okay. With regard to the packaging,
Oh.
is that the package that you received it in?
My apologies. Yes, this is the package that I was received in.
All right. And were there any signs of damage or tampering to that packaging?
No.
Okay. Now, I did neglect to ask you, when you went through your examination of this firearm, was it functioning properly?
It was.
Okay. Now, you indicated you received some other items. Let me begin with shell casings.
Thank you.
Did you indicate you received some spent shell casings from various crime scenes?
I did. I received 4 .40 caliber cartridge cases.
Okay. And with respect to the 4 cartridge cases, I'm showing you what's been marked as States Exhibits 669 and 670, 4 cartridge cases that have already been tendered into evidence collected from Sycamore Drive. 2 from near Officer Tony Howard's vehicle and 2 from in front of Officer Christian's vehicle. Do you recognize those shell casings?
May I open the package?
Excuse me, I'm not bitch that over there.
669, 670.
May I open the package?
Absolutely.
Thank you. do recognize States Exhibits 669 and 670. They are 4 .40 caliber cartridge cases. My seals and initials are on all of the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
And were these 4 shell casings packaged as they are today?
Yes, they are.
And were there any signs of damage or tampering to these items when you received them?
No.
And did you receive any projectiles relating to the murder of Officer Buddy Christian as well as the shooting of Officer Tony Hunt?
I did.
I want to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 676. And this has already been tendered as a projectile from the passenger side B pillar of Officer Tony Howard's vehicle on Sycamore Drive. And I'll ask if you recognize this item.
Thank you. I do recognize States Exhibit 676. It is a package containing a .40 caliber metal jacketed bullet. And my seals and initials are on the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
In addition to that particular projectile, I want you to look at States Exhibit 679, which has already been tendered into evidence. A projectile located within the front passenger seat of the vehicle of Officer Buddy Christian of Sycamore Drive.
Okay. I recognize States Exhibit 679. It is a package containing a .40 caliber metal jacketed bullet. My seals and initials are on the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
Now, in addition to the 2 projectiles that were recovered from the vehicles of Officer Tony Howard and Officer Buddy Christian, did you also receive a projectile that was removed from the body of Officer Tony Howard? And that would be States Exhibit 180 that's already been tendered into evidence.
I did. Thank you. I do recognize States Exhibit 180. It is a package containing a .40 caliber metal jacketed bullet. My seals and initials are on the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
And lastly, I want to show you States Exhibit 1151. It's already been tendered into evidence. A projectile recovered from the body of Officer Elmer, Michigan.
This package is still sealed. Do you want me, wish me to open it?
If you need to identify the projectile, you may. Do you need some scissors?
No. I was just making sure it was still sealed.
Okay.
I do recognize State's Exhibit 1151. It is a steel sealed package containing a .40 caliber metal jacketed bullet. My seals and initials are on the package, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
And with respect to all of these projectiles and all of these spent shell casings, were any of these packages damaged or tampered with in any way when you received them?
No.
Now, when you received the projectiles that we just described in the spent casings, were you asked to determine if these items were fired from that Smith & Wesson handgun you showed us earlier?
Yes, I was asked to perform a microscopic identification or comparison. I was asked to compare test fires from the Smith & Wesson to determine if the bullets and cartridge cases found from the scene and from the autopsy were fired from that specific firearm.
And can you kind of describe that process, if you will?
First thing that I did was I took the firearm and did a function check to make sure that the firearm was safe to fire. I then test fired the firearm into our water recovery tank to collect the pristine test samples. I then collected those test sampled bullets and the test sampled cartridge cases and compared them to the evidence bullets and evidence cartridge cases using the comparison microscope, looking for those class and individual characteristics. If the characteristics matched, then up between the test fires and between the evidence bullets and evidence cartridge cases, then I could say that those bullets and those cartridge cases were fired from that specific Smith & Wesson.
And are all the procedures that you just described generally accepted by the scientific community?
They are.
And are these procedures reliable and reproducible?
They are.
And are these procedures based on valid scientific theory?
They are.
Now, based upon your microscopic examinations of the items that you've just described, based on your expertise, based on your training, based on the tests you conducted, did you form an opinion as to whether these projectiles and these spent casings were fired from that Smith & Wesson .40 caliber handgun?
Yes, I did. I was able to determine that the bullets and the cartridge cases were all fired from the Smith & Wesson pistol that was submitted.
All right. And when you perform these testing and analysis, is it peer-reviewed within the GBI lab?
Yes, every examination that we do is peer-reviewed before being released.
And was yours peer-reviewed before it was released?
It was.
And was the peer review consistent with your findings?
It was.
Now, in addition to the projectiles and shell casings we've already described, did you receive additional shell casings to determine if those shell casings were also fired from that Smith & Wesson?
I did.
I would ask you to look at State's Exhibit 1093, shell casings recovered from Nottingham Drive. And these shell casings are associated with the murder of Omari Wright.
I do recognize State's Exhibit 1093. It is a package containing 6 40 caliber cartridge cases. My seals and initials are on the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
And can you physically describe those shell casings, for example, the color and the stamp?
Yes, they are aluminum cartridge cases with a nickel primer, and the head stamp says CCI 40 Smith & Wesson.
And are aluminum casings as common as brass?
No. CCI is one of the very few manufacturers that actually use aluminum cartridge cases.
And in your line of work, you see a lot of aluminum shell casings?
If they're CCI, then yes.
And when you received the package that you just described, I believe it's State's Exhibit 1193, is that correct?
1093.
1093. Was it packaged similarly as it is today?
It was.
And when you received it, was there any signs of damage or tampering?
No, sir.
Next, I'd like to show you what's been already tendered in State's Exhibit 88, a spent CCI shell casing recovered in the back of a brown Cadillac. 88. And I'll ask, do you recognize that item?
I do recognize State's Exhibit 88. It is a package containing a 40 caliber cartridge case. My seals and initials are on the packaging, as well as the unique GBI case number and item number.
Now, with respect to the last package, was it packaged as it is today?
It is.
And did you notice any signs of damage or tampering when you received that package?
No, sir.
Now, were you asked with regard to State's Exhibit 88 and 1093, the 6 shell casings recovered from Nottingham and the 1 shell casing recovered from the back of the brown Cadillac, were you asked to determine if those shell casings were fired from the 40 caliber Smith & Wesson hand?
Yes, I was.
And describe the process you went through for that examination.
When I compared these cartridge cases to test fires from the Smith & Wesson, I had already test fired the Smith & Wesson, so I already had the cartridge case test fires. I compared those test fires to the cartridge cases found at the scene to determine if they were fired, if those cartridge cases were fired from that Smith.
And based on your training and experience and the analysis that you conducted, did you form an opinion?
I did.
And what was that opinion?
I was able to determine that the cartridge cases were not fired from the Smith & Wesson pistol. However, all 7 of those cartridge cases, the 6 from the first package and the 1 in this package, were fired from 1 gun, and that gun is consistent with being a high-point 40 caliber pistol.
Okay. So in other words, the 1 shell casing that was located in the brown Cadillac was directly linked to the 6 shell casings recovered at Nottingham Drive.
Correct. They were fired from the same firearm.
Now, did you reduce to writing these testing and findings?
I did.
And did you do so in an official GBI forensic report?
I did.
I'd like to show the witness State's Exhibits 1144 and 1145. recognize those two items? State's Exhibit, is it 1144 and 1145?
They are.
And do you recognize those two documents?
I do recognize States Exhibits 1144 and 1145. They are copies of the official reports that I released regarding these cases.
And do they fairly and accurately represent the testing that you performed and your conclusions?
They do.
Your Honor, state moves to tender States Exhibits 1144 and 1145.
Any objection?
No, sir, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
Now, I neglected to ask you with regard to your testing and analysis of the shell casings from Nottingham and from the back of the Cadillac, were those testing also peer-reviewed?
They were. Every case that the GBI does is peer-reviewed before they're released.
And was the peer review consistent with your findings?
They were.
Now, I want to ask you one more set of questions. Have you had an opportunity to review the case file involving the murder of Officer Buddy Christian, as well as the shooting of Officer Tony Hunt?
I have looked at it.
I want to show you what's already been tendered into evidence. And I'm going to start with State's Exhibit 329. And I want to ask you a couple questions about this. With regard to State's Exhibit 329, the patrol vehicle of Officer Buddy Christian, can you see the placards number 3 and 4?
Yes, I can see placard 3 and placard 4.
And this photograph has already been tendered and identified as 2 shell casings, 3 and 4. And I guess the first question I want to ask you is, based on the location of these shell casings, are you able to determine where the shooter was standing?
I apologize, but no, I can't determine the location of a shooter by the location of cartridge cases.
And can you sort of explain why that is?
Well, because with cartridge cases, especially using ejection of the firearm to determine the location of a shooter, there are too many variables involved. With regards to where these cartridge cases are resting, there's no way to know if where they're resting now is the same place where they were resting when the crime was committed. They could have been kicked, they could have been run over, the wind could have blown them. Those are factors that have to be taken into account. Even with regards to the actual ejection of the cartridge cases, when they hit concrete, they bounce. And when they bounce, they don't bounce like rubber balls, they bounce like footballs. They're going to bounce left, they're going to bounce right, they're going to bounce up, they're going to bounce forward, backwards. It's unknown where they're going to bounce. So with that regard, where they rest, you can't determine the location because of that. You also have to take in consideration the position of the gun when it was fired. If the gun was being fired in the normal shooting position, then the cartridge cases will eject to the right and to the left as the manufacturer intended. However, if the gun's even tilted just slightly, that arc is going to change. So if you're holding it to the side, it's going to go straight back. If you're holding it the other way, it's going to go straight down. If you're holding it normal, it's going to go right and left. If you're holding it just a little bit angled, it's going to change that trajectory. That's something that we don't know and we have to take into account. The height of the shooter is also another fact that you have to consider. For example, I'm 6'1", so when I hold at shoulder height, if someone's much shorter than me, that gun's going to be much lower if they fire at shoulder height. That's going to affect the trajectory. Also how you hold the gun, because with a pistol, the forces of recoil is also determined on how hard you hold that gun. So if I'm holding it loose or if I'm putting a death grip on it, that's going to affect the trajectory of the cartridge cases. So there are just too many factors that you have to consider in order to use ejection to determine the position of a shooter. You just can't do it.
So just so we understand, and if I may clarify, the manufacturer intends for a shell casing to be projected backwards and to the right.
That's correct.
Okay, but you can alter that by the way your hands are positioned up, down, left, or right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, is there another variable concerning how tightly you grip the weapon?
Yes.
Can you explain that to the jury?
Yes. Whether it's if you grip it loose, if you grip it tight, or you grip it somewhere in between, how you hold that firearm is going to affect how far or how much of an arc that cartridge case is going to eject.
All right. So with regard to where the shell casings are laying right here, is there any way you can definitively indicate where the shooter is standing?
No, there are too many variables to take into account to accurately determine the position of a shooter.
And I would ask you to also look at State's Exhibit 322. And this has already been entered into evidence and identified as the patrol car of Officer Tony Howard. You see the placard by the tire there, placard number 1.
I do see it.
And that's already been identified as a shell casing. And I'm going to ask you the same question. Based on the position of that shell casing, can you determine where the shooter was standing?
No, sir, I cannot.
And then is that based on the same reasons you previously described?
Yes, there are too many variables to take into account to accurately determine the position.
Now, going back to State's Exhibit 329. Other than the shell casings, is there another way to more accurately determine where a shooter is standing?
Well, if you can link a bullet to a certain trajectory, you can use trajectory of the bullet to get a better estimate of where the location of a shooter is.
And with respect to this vehicle, the patrol vehicle of Officer Buddy Christian, did you also review the crime scene photos
Yes,
of that particular shooting?
I have seen them.
Looking at State's Exhibit 290, do you recognize that photo?
Yes, I do recognize it.
Let me stop for just a moment, please. I think you just got some direction. That crime scene photos are not to be broadcast. Clear? Thank you. Continue.
Thank you, sir. Now, from this photo, can you tell where the officer is sitting?
It appears the officer is sitting in the driver's seat.
All right. And are you able to see the injury to his neck? Are you able to see the gunshot wound to his neck?
It's fuzzy, but you can see the neck injury.
All right. Let me show a more close-up photo. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 305. Is that a better photograph?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And are you aware that the medical examiner determined that was a through and through and did not strike any bone?
I'm aware.
Okay. Now I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 458. And are you familiar with this photograph?
I am.
And with regard to where the bullet from that gunshot wound ended up, can you indicate to the jury your understanding?
As you can see right here, the bullet was recovered from the passenger seat of the vehicle.
And given the downward angle and trajectory, does that assist you in trying to determine where the shooter was located?
Yes, it gives me 3 points of contact.
And going back to the State's Exhibit 329, where the bullet came to rest, striking Officer Buddy Christian in the neck, the through-and-through shot, did you, based on your training and experience and your review on the crime scene photos, do you have an opinion as to the general area where the shooter would be standing at the time of the shooting?
Yes, my opinion is that the shooter was around the window when the shot was fired.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. When you say around the window, based on what you reviewed, would it be possible for the shooter to be standing in this area?
Not in the front of the car, no.
Or all the way in the front of the bumper?
No.
What about behind the car?
No, you would have to,
Would he have to be in this area here?
yes, because you would need to shoot the window, the neck, and end up in the side of the passenger seat, which could be done from the area of the window.
One moment, please. Nothing further at this point.
I'm gonna cross-examine White's voice.
Morning, Mr. Felix.
Good morning.
Mr. Felix, in Carter case, number one, have you ever knowingly hurt yourself on the stand before?
No, sir.
So, you never had a case in Augusta where you done had to have a case reviewed because you hurt yourself on stand?
No.